commissary system to beneficiaries and the effects of any possible changes to the commissary's business model. As we're all well aware, commissary benefits are a valued part of our current and retired service members' compensation package and contribute to their and their families' overall quality of life. The Military Personnel Subcommittee is taking every opportunity to thoroughly review and discuss the way forward on any commissary reform and is committed to retaining the commissary benefit while improving the business practices of the commissary system and at the same time reducing its dependence on appropriated funds. Our purpose today is to gain an understanding from the panel on their views of the possible effects to the beneficiaries or to the business practices of our industry partners of any changes to the commissary system business model. Before I introduce my panel, I'd like to offer Congresswoman Davis an opportunity to make any opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Good to see all of you here today. Our panel represents beneficiaries as well as retail industry partners that work with the commissary system. I think we can all agree that what is paramount in this discussion is that the commissary benefit must be maintained. How that happens, though, and what the system will look like is what we're here to discuss. Change is never easy, we know, but in today's physical environment, it is required. This committee certainly has met several times since the release of the Boston Consulting Group report, and we've heard from the BCG as well as the Department of Defense on ways to sustain the commissary benefit, even when we know and we hear that many feel that the commissary system is just not sustainable as it is currently today. I was pleased to hear from DoD leadership that they concur with the report. Regardless of how much reform is done to create a more efficient business model, keeping the savings that are realized today for patrons is critical. As we wait to see what the department will submit to Congress for this year's NDAA, I would encourage all of us, all of you, to work with the DoD and help us reform a system that will endure into the future. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses as we work to responsibly and efficiently protect the commissary benefit for our service members and families. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. I now ask unanimous consent that the following testimony be entered into the record from the American Federation of Government Employees. Without objection, so ordered. So I want to let our panel know that votes are scheduled sometime between 11:15 and 11:30. We will push to 11:30 until the clock actually runs to zero on the vote. My goal is to get the hearing completed so we don't have to hold you here while we go vote. We are joined again today by an outstanding panel. We'll give each witness the opportunity to make opening comments and each member an opportunity to question the witnesses. Respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize to the greatest extent possible the high points of their written testimony in no more than 5 minutes. Your complete written statements will be entered into the hearing record. As a reminder, the lights in front of you will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has concluded. We are joined today by Mr. Patrick Nixon, President of the American Logistics Association, Mr. Tom Gordy, President of the Armed Forces Marketing Council, Ms. Eileen Huck, Government Relations Deputy Director for the National Military Family Association, and Ms. Brooke Goldberg, Deputy Director for Government Relations Military Officers Association of America. That, Mr. Nixon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ranking member Ms. Davis, committee members and staff. It's an honor once again to appear before you representing the member companies of the American Logistics Association and to provide views on commissary reform. Mr. Chairman, we are always open to new go-to-market strategies. However, we need to play the cards that we actually have been dealt. Until the new FIDUP is approved, we are facing a $1 billion reduction in commissary funding in 2017. The GAO review on privatization is supposed to be completed February 1st. We don't know what that's going to say. Until DoD submits its report requested by the 2016 NDAA on key topics to include a new twist, budget neutrality, we do not know the way ahead. But, Mr. Chairman, with these negative headwinds, it is not a time to put one's head in the sand, and we are not the association of no. We are, in fact, bolstered by positive indicators. First, Mr. Chairman, you and Chairman Thornberry have consistently said that the funding levels for defense should be driven by strategy and not the other way around. As a subset of national defense, this translates directly for resale programs as well. This committee has affirmed its belief in the value of the resale benefit and its commitment to preserving it. It's the next iteration of this evolution, taking concepts to practice where we face the most peril. Mr. Chairman, on the DoD side, there's a new sheriff in town. Peter Levine, as the Deputy Chief Management Officer, has presented a more tempered view of the way ahead. He has also stated the strategy needs to drive the budget. We also understand that DoD feels the need to conduct a series of pilots to sort out an alternative universe for military resale. There is where we say, proceed with extreme caution. Mr. Chairman, I've been in this business for a long time, and I've concluded that there are 3 pillars of influence that must be measured in any strategic discussion moving a resale program forward: patron confidence, supplier confidence, and retailer confidence. Patron confidence in the current business model is rock solid. In the commissary, it's goods at cost with a surcharge. It is the ultimate company store. The patron invests in the system through the surcharge. They build their own stores. It's a brand name business. Items only make it in the system if they have a demonstrated retail presence in the private sector. They only remain in the system if they have a demonstrated customer preference. Its strength is predictability. In a pilot that proposes to change product pricing, whether by store or region, can you improve on the current level of predictability? If you introduce a private label program that requires a retailer to price, position, and promote a product line with artificial customer preference in order to make a profit, can you improve on the current level of predictability? What are you going to tell the patron? This is their store. This is the model they trust. Supplier confidence is equally important. Brand name goods at cost create a one-of-a-kind business environment. It's the ultimate supply and demand ecology. Patron preference drives what's on the shelf and what stays on the shelf. There are no hidden retailer activities like sliding fees, promotional skimming, or advertising pools. Under audited price warranties, the military retailer gets the best pricing from the manufacturer. Manufacturers contribute almost $500 million in costs to offset annually the system through promotional trade spending, stocking, display building, inventory management, and special military events. The introduction of a different pricing model in private label changes the game. What will be the reduction in support from industry if you change the model? What will be the cost to the retailer to develop, position, price, and promote a private label introduction, once again, with artificial patron preference built in? You will be removing proven, name brand value items to position private label items to make a profit. What will be the impact on supplier confidence as these pilots proceed? Finally, there's retailer confidence. First, the exchanges are probably saying, why am I here in this discussion? This is a commissary issue. Fact is, the carefully constructed economic ecology and the military resale system is forever interlocked. During the last government shutdown, when commissaries were closed, exchanges dropped sales 30%. The exchanges are extremely interested in proposed commissary pilots. What if they fail? What will be the impact of patron confidence on their traffic and sales? On the commissary side, this is uncharted territory. They have done an exceptional job at administering a cherished military benefit, but becoming a retailer is different. They have weathered a government shutdown, employee furloughs, and now they await a privatization study, a budget-neutral discussion, and the outlook of a non-appropriated fund workforce. It reminds me of the saying, the beatings will continue until morale improves. When it's all said and done, these discussions will be critical for preserving this important benefit and moving forward. I commit the resources and expertise of the American Logistics Association to make this move forward successful. Thank you for this opportunity to participate, and I look forward to our discussions, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the Personnel Subcommittee, thank you for your commitment to our warriors and their families who continue to tirelessly serve and sacrifice in defense of our nation. And thank you for the opportunity to share views on behalf of the Armed Forces Marketing Council regarding efforts to reform the commissary benefit. As you are aware, to date, there are no specific reforms that have been publicly proposed by the DoD since the NDAA was passed and signed into law last month. But from that law, we are very grateful that for the committee's work to establish benchmarks for any potential reform efforts, which include ensuring high levels of customer satisfaction, the provision of high-quality products, and the sustainment of discount savings. As we begin our discussion today, we believe it is helpful to remember that it was Congress who established this benefit as a non-pay compensation benefit for military personnel. The model that Congress forged is one that is as brilliant as it is simple, offering products at cost plus 6% to provide military families a non-pay compensation benefit. While no specific formal proposals have been offered to the committee, over the course of the past 2 years, suggestions have been offered for commissary reform by both the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Committee and the Boston Consulting Group that would alter the model. The suggestions call for a more complex operational model through untested and underanalyzed pricing schemes and adjustments to product assortment, which will require growth in both personnel and operational costs. Since it is highly unlikely that appropriations will be increased to cover these costs, the revenue will have to be generated, and it can only come from one source, and that's the military family. The suggestions that have been offered are based on assumptions that product and pricing schemes are manageable and would still offer a benefit to military families. But even the suggestions have a caveat that they need to be further analyzed. We agree. And we also believe that full spectrum analysis should be conducted on all efforts that would change DECA's fundamental mission and seek to generate revenue from military families. We also believe that accountability for the commissary benefit should remain with Congress. We hope that if the reform test pilots begin to fail to meet established benchmarks, and if the DoD fails to act in an expeditious manner to protect the benefit, that Congress will step in to do so. We appreciate the committee's approach that permanent changes to Title X will be based on concepts that are proven to be beneficial and efficacious to the long-term viability of the commissary benefit. Since commissaries are only one part of the military quality of life ecosystem on military bases, which also include the military exchanges and MWR programs, and that there is an interdependent relationship between these three organizations, we agree with Congress that any effort to reform commissaries should weigh the impacts on exchanges in MWR. While the budgetary pressures of ongoing deficits and the sequester have forced DoD to make painful cuts to numerous programs, we recognize that resale is not immune to the pursuit of efficiencies. We have always held that efficiencies can be achieved within the commissary system and should occur as long as they do not result in higher prices and diminished benefits for military families. We agree with DoD's Deputy Chief Management Officer, Peter Levine, that efficiencies should drive the budget and are encouraged by this new approach within DoD. As we consider commissary reform, it is important to remember the words of Lee Scott, the former CEO and current board member of Walmart, who said, "Rule number one of retailing is don't aggravate your customer." Unfortunately, some have learned this truth the hard way. Two examples include Walmart's clean store policy and JCPenney's attempt to offer everyday low prices to its customers, both of which resulted in significant sales declines and the firing of senior leaders. They listened to their consultants and even their customer surveys, but the changes ended up aggravating customers who either purchased less and or shopped elsewhere. Therefore, we approach reform efforts cautiously due to these recent real-world examples in which demonstrate how sensitive the retail marketplace is to change. As BCG discovered, even a 5% increase in prices in the commissary would result in 26% decrease in traffic. In other words, to generate $143 million in revenue would cost DECA $1.3 billion in lost sales. That should serve as caution to anyone interested in commissary reform that efforts should be fully analyzed and evaluated and carefully implemented. Thus, reform efforts should be a game of inches, proceeding slowly and only implementing concepts that can be easily reversed if negative effects begin to occur. Chairman Huck, I look forward to your questions and discussing specific suggestions for reform with you in the committee. I yield back.
Chairman Huck, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present testimony on the military resale system and its value to military families. Military families tell us that the commissary is one of their most valued benefits. While we understand and appreciate the need for efficiency and fiscal restraint, we caution against making changes to commissary funding levels or operations that put at risk a benefit many families rely upon. When discussing the commissary benefit, it is important first to understand what that benefit really is. Our association has argued that the commissary benefit is not just the existence of a brick-and-mortar grocery store on an installation. Rather, the benefit is the savings that service members and families see when they shop at the commissary. Those savings are a vital non-pay benefit relied on by many military families, especially junior service members and those families in remote or high-cost locations. Any proposal to alter the commissary operating structure or reduce its funding level must, in our view, also preserve the savings. Those savings are not insignificant. The Defense Commissary Agency, or DECA, reports that families who regularly shop at the commissary save 30% over civilian grocery stores. We recognize that individual families' level of savings will vary based on their location and shopping habits. However, DECA's mandate to sell groceries at cost plus 6% provides all military families with the assurance that they will be able to put food on the table at a reasonable cost regardless of where they are stationed. The unique challenges of military life increase the importance of the commissary benefit. Due largely to frequent military-ordered moves, military spouse unemployment rates are far higher than their civilian counterparts. For this reason, many military families must get by on a single income. Many junior families actually qualify for nutrition assistance through the Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC program. Commissary savings allow those families to stretch their food dollars and help ensure that even the most junior service members can feed their families. We hear often from military families who tell us how much they value the commissary benefit. When we posted an article on our website about recent proposals to cut commissary funding, dozens of military families wrote back to share their experiences with the commissary. One military spouse wrote, "We are a family of 6 and have been in the military for 17 years. The commissary is something we have relied on at every duty station we have been. We are currently stationed in Alaska and use the commissary and the exchange on a weekly basis. With the prices in Alaska being higher than what we are used to, the comfort of the commissary made it easier to make sure I have all I need to feed my family." Several recent proposals regarding the commissary include plans to reduce the appropriation and use revenues generated by commissary sales to operate the resale system. We ask you to consider, if such a plan is adopted, what would happen if revenues were to decrease. This concern is not unfounded. Last year, the department commissioned the RAND Corporation to study what would be the effects of increased commissary prices. Not surprisingly, RAND found that if prices increase, fewer military families would choose to shop at the commissary, leading to a reduction in commissary revenue. We fear that faced with lower revenues, DECA would be forced to reduce operating hours, lay off employees, and ultimately close stores in order to cut operating costs. We are gratified that the DoD has expressed a commitment to preserving commissary savings in its recent fact sheet on the resale system. However, much depends on how DoD defines what it calls the tangible and intangible elements of the benefit and what metrics it uses to ensure its goals are met. We ask Congress to require transparency from the department as it develops plans to optimize the resale system. Military families deserve the assurance that any changes to the military resale system prioritize their well-being. In closing, we note that maximizing revenue has never been a priority for the commissary, nor should it be. The mission of the commissary is to provide military families with a vital non-pay benefit, the savings they realize by shopping there. In our view, DECA has fulfilled this essential mission effectively and well. Before making any changes to the commissary's operations, we ask that you first consider the impact on military families who rely on commissary savings to help ensure they are ready and able to support their service member. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing on commissary reform. Your defense of this landmark benefit that has supported military personnel and their families for generations is critical to its continued existence today. I'm pleased to be here to represent more than 390,000 MOA members and as an Air Force spouse of 13 years. I'm a regular patron of the commissary and have depended on it during 11 years of my husband's active service, including 10 deployments for OIF, and now that he's a reservist. Repeatedly, advocates come to the Hill to protect this benefit, and it's remained protected because of your efforts and support. That support exists because it has intrinsic and real value and provides a consistent and dependable benefit that would be costly to replace. Our service members, retirees, wounded warriors, widows, and families know no matter how big or small the town, how far it is from family or familiar surroundings, the commissary will be there. It provides the consistent products, savings, and community they have come to know and rely on from the first day they stepped through the gate. The amount of money appropriated for the commissary costs taxpayers the equivalent of a 2% pay raise to the entire military. But the monetary value to the E5 with 8 years of service and a family of 4 is equivalent to a 9% pay raise. That amount's higher for the most junior enlisted. Imagine the value it has to an 82-year-old widow on a fixed income, or the wounded warrior and family trying to get back on their feet and find a new normal. In times of austerity, we should not be looking to cut a benefit that the currently serving, wounded, widows, and retirees so greatly rely upon and earned access to when we can't afford to replace it with something equally good or better. We are gratified that the Department of Defense has heard the call from patrons and recognized that the savings is the benefit, and higher prices or surcharges will hurt them or make them stop shopping at the commissary altogether. DoD says it is focused on maintaining the patron benefit. We hope this includes using DECA's current market basket calculation methods for savings. It's important to not reinvent what patron benefit is. If DoD uses new metrics to determine the current savings levels that will be used as the metric going forward, we will not be measuring apples to apples. DECA currently compares thousands of items in its market basket study against private grocers and calculates an average savings of 30%. When Boston Consulting Group measured just 50 items in their market basket, it found a much lower savings level. We believe changing the market basket study could result in a reduced benefit by excluding comparison of items commonly purchased by patrons in calculating the savings measured. Therefore, maintaining consistency with previous calculations is imperative to maintaining the benefit that patrons know and rely on. DECA has been repeatedly asked to find efficiencies in providing this benefit, and they've done so. However, at some point, we think they will be forced to find them where it will be unpalatable to patrons, either through price increases, changes in service, or changes in quality. The cut to the second destination transportation subsidy in Asia last year recently demonstrated the potential costs passed on to patrons, with a bag of romaine lettuce costing more than $10 in Guam. Those stationed overseas at the pleasure of their government should not be stuck with the bill for shipping resources to their location. Proposals to merge the commissary and the exchanges are common. Most have not occurred because it's difficult when businesses use different backroom logistics, different business goals, and operating restrictions. We simply don't know what we don't know. How will this affect product quality, savings, and customer satisfaction levels? If for the worse, how will that affect foot traffic for the exchange, affecting MWR dividends, affecting patron trust, access, and sustainment of support and quality of life programs? How will this impact the employment and earning power of approximately 10,000 military-affiliated employees, including more than 4,000 military spouses? Maintaining the benefit at levels patrons can depend on, provide quality products, customer satisfaction, and savings with accessible hours and service should be the priority. And we thank this committee for outlining those benchmarks in the National Defense Authorization Act. We think those benchmarks are the best metric, which all new proposals should be evaluated against. Thank you for this opportunity to share the views of MOA and its members. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, and I yield the rest of my time.
Great. Thank you all very much for your testimony and for all of you staying within the 5-minute time frame. I think it's the first for this panel. I'll ask Ms. Huck and Ms. Goldberg first. The committee has heard from DoD that military families desire the option of purchasing a private label product from their commissaries, and the study done by BCG recommended that commissaries should offer private label products. Since private label products are uniformly offered in retail grocery outlets, do you believe that military patrons should be afforded the same choice as outside the gate, and why or why not?
Mr. Chairman, our concern is that DECA does not have the expertise to develop a private label product, and we are concerned about what the extra expenses and logistical responsibilities would be incurred if DECA were to be required to develop a private label product. Right now, the commissary sells name brand items that patrons are familiar with, and they have the assurance that those items are of high quality and low cost. We're concerned that asking DECA to develop a private label product would not give patrons that same assurance of quality.
Okay. Ms. Goldberg?
I think that Eileen covered all of the things that I also would cover.
Great. Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Nixon and Mr. Gordy. You understand that you both organizations have concerns and disagreements with some of the BCG findings. If you could list your top 1 or 2 concerns with a particular finding, please do so.
Quickly, Mr. Chairman, I'd characterize the results from the BCG report as kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Their pricing survey was certainly very limited when you consider that the Defense Commissary Agency does a full comparison, item by item UPC, weighted by volume, regionalized. They do local surveys on meat and produce to calculate the 30% savings. So it was kind of disingenuous to go out and take a small sample and come back and say, here's more what the savings range is. The other thing is they really kind of almost talked with disdain about the non-retail aspects of the Defense Commissary Agency, that they have these anomalies of vendor stocking and contracted out functions within the store. The fact is that's the way Congress constructed the system. That's the way DOD constructed it, and it has a lot of different anomalies to it that are built-in inefficiencies because it's a federal agency. They have inherently non-governmental function surveys. They went through the A76 process, outsourced a lot of their functions: shelf stocking, receiving, storage, and handling, custodial. A lot of those are awarded at a premium under Javits Wagner O'Day, so it costs more to operate in the environment. So in a retail operation, you would never operate a store that way. I think the BCG kind of missed that they're doing what they're doing because that's how they were set up to operate. There are more efficient ways to do it if you want to make them a retailer, but you need to make them a retailer first.
Mr. Gordy?
I would say the top two items of concern for us related to the BCG report would be the private label products and variable pricing. First of all, the private label product, the main concern there is currently you have name brand products being put into the stores. And for those products to get into that store, there's about, as Mr. Nixon said in his opening testimony, there's about $500 million of industry support that goes to ensure that those products are stocked, that, well, first of all, that they are ordered, that they are stocked, that they are marketed, that they are promoted. These are activities that take place in every commissary every single day that is funded by industry. To institute a private label product is going to have two effects. Number one, DECA is now going to have to, what makes private labels successful in the civilian marketplace is the amount of actual marketing that goes into getting the patron to buy those products. So DECA is now going to have to put into their, add to their cost and add to their staffing people who have to go out and market these products. Then they're also going to have somebody stock those products. And then they'll have someone go in there, and then they'll have to do the promotions and the other the displays and things like that to get the patrons to buy them. Well, if DECA is now going to take on those functions within the store, which is currently being provided by industry today, many of these and these products are going to compete with the national brands. The national brand manufacturers are going to say, if DECA is now going to provide this in-store support, which we're currently providing today, which we don't provide to any other retailer, then we're no longer going to provide it for DECA. So that is a conversation that has not taken place. No one has asked the manufacturers what will change. If you look at the BCG report, they list all the people that they consulted. They did not consult the industry, who are the third leg of the three-legged stool of delivery of this benefit. So they're missing a major piece of the pie here. And in order to make variable pricing work within the commissary, they're going to have to institute variable pricing, which allows DECA now to raise prices on products. This becomes a slippery slope. Today, DOD can say we're going to keep our hands tightly held on this, and we're only going to do what generate enough revenue just to help offset a little bit of cost. We don't know what will happen 5 to 10 years from now with the future leaders within DOD.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps I can continue with this conversation a little bit about the labeling, because I do remember in sitting here, as a consumer, when we had this discussion with BCA, we know that, we all adopt, if you will, certain companies now and have some faith in their label. So it seemed like, well, okay, I think our military families, and you would subscribe to this, certainly have faith in the commissary. I mean, they have great faith in the commissary. They would transfer that in some ways. But on the other hand, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I was struck that Ms. Huck, you were saying that they don't have the expertise. It's not that they don't have the wherewithal to have the expertise, but the system hasn't been set up that way. And so there's really a gap there. I think what I'm wondering is how, if you were tasked with trying to develop a process, and because it would be over time, to test this on a number of ways in which you were consulted and you were part of that, how would you do that? What do you think that we should be listening out for if, in fact, people say, you know, let's give it a try?
Well, Ms. Davis, the first thing is a business system. This pricing model requires a sophisticated business system to manage price elasticity between the brand name and private labels and things that patrons are used to seeing out in the private sector. That system is currently being deployed at the Defense Commissary Agency. The first model that would give them the capability to even begin to look at this capability will be probably in the third quarter of this year. So they'll just begin to have the capability then. They'll have to start testing it. As with any system deployment, if it's delayed, then that capability is delayed. That's the first thing, because you can't do this on a pencil and paper, and so they need the system. They'll have that in place.
Have you all been consulted about developing that system?
This is a system that they procured through the government process. It's
Okay,
commercial off the shelf. I don't have any qualms about the system, and it's replacing a lot of antiquated systems they had down there when I was down there. So they finally got around to replacing those. But and then the expertise. It's not just the system; it's the expertise to manage in that environment. And they don't have it. It's not their fault. They just weren't constructed to manage in that environment. So those are capabilities. My concern is they're going to we're going to figure out, well, how do I do variable pricing in private label? They don't know. They bring a consultant in and says, well, here's how you raise prices, and here's my bill, and make sure you raise them high enough to pay it. That's kind of the path we're going on right now. It'll take a while for them to develop that capability.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. They would, even if you take a look at the Boston Consulting Group's report, they lay out that DECA is going to have to first bring in a manager, and then they're going to have to bring in analysts to manage. The way that they characterize it is you need one analyst for every 2 categories, and there's numerous categories within the commissary. So how many of these analysts are going to be required to be able to do this? Then you have to manage the savings. The way the savings, according to their survey, they went outside the gate at some commissaries, particular ones, and they measured the price of goods around each base that they tested. Well, you can't do that at every single base. How much time and effort is that going to take to maintain that level of savings outside, comparatively to outside the gate at each base? So some of the challenges with price rationalization, particularly trying to raise prices in certain parts of the country and then lower it in other parts of the country, that's going to take a lot of work to be able to pull off.
I appreciate that, Mr. Gordy. Thank you. I'm just wondering, just in terms of the delivery and to families and, the decisions that people make, of course, every day, and sometimes it takes a period of time for people to like transfer their loyalty. What is it about that delivery to families that you think especially needs attention?
I think there are a few things.
Given that maybe some of these, so many of these very important contingencies and issues would be worked out.
Are you asking specifically about private label and variable pricing? I think that anytime you mess with the savings level, any time that families perceive that there is a threat to the savings that they receive when they go in the door, and an alteration to the delivery of the system, that you risk their loyalty. They really rely on knowing exactly what they're getting when they walk through that door, whether that door is at Stuttgart or in Guam or near Seattle or at Fort Sill. They rely on that consistency. And so when you change things, you risk them leaving and not coming back, which then affects a whole lot of other systems that we rely on to support our military families.
Okay. I think my time is up, Ms. Huck. Maybe we'll follow up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for holding this, and thank each of you for being here and your testimony and what you do. I think about it, with all the stress of military life, grocery shopping should not be one of them. And thanks to all of you, it hasn't been. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. I think you started to hit on that. Ms. Goldberg is hitting on it, of all the things involved in it, that there's a strong psychological benefit here. And I think we need to, again, I don't say that to justify a wastefulness or where we can find efficiencies. I say it because it's a reality of military life. So I appreciate that. And I think it's probably because of the due diligence of the chairman and the ranking member, I'm thinking about this. And I don't know if this means anything or not, but since I've been on this committee, I've had more opportunity to look for cost savings in the commissary than the F-35. And that's somewhat, it's a little chip on my shoulder about that. If we're looking for cost savings, there's other places. But I do think it's right to look at these things and ask. And I think you're asking all the right questions. But Ms. Goldberg, how would you, and I know maybe you can't quantify it, how high would you say, because I'm thinking about this, how do we explain to civilian sector how important the commissary is? How high do your members place the commissary benefit?
I don't have a specific numerical answer for you, but consistently when MOA has surveyed its members and other advocacy groups as well, there have been lots of studies on this. Service members and their families, retirees, rank the commissary very high, one of their most favorite benefits, along with health care. It's critical.
I find myself talking to civilian people not quite understanding what our obsession is with the grocery store, but it's real. And especially, and I ask you this, are we getting into the wrong territory here if we separate CONUS with OCONUS on the benefit of it? Because I think that psychological effect is even stronger overseas. And I'm asking, is there things we can do here because of the availability of private sector, or is that the wrong way to go about it?
I agree that the need for commissaries at OCONUS is very, very obvious. And there are a lot of questions about CONUS, but the reliance on commissaries stateside is still very, very important. Families rely on it. It is not just a grocery store. It's a place where military families meet up, whether they're in a high-density area or a very remote area. Here in the D.C. area, military families are spread out all over the national capital region, but the commissary is one place where they have in common. And the price matching, or the price, not the price matching, but the price savings on goods is really, really critical. I have tons of grocery shopping choices. When I moved here, I will tell you, I was shocked when a package of bacon cost $8 at my local private grocery store. But I went to the commissary, and it was roughly the same price it had been at the commissary that I went to in Florida. That mattered.
Yeah, it does matter, and I think all of you are hitting on something. Again, it's not stuck in that, not afraid of change type of issue, but I still am not sure, and I think each of you hit on this, the unintended consequences of a change like this have not been studied, and I think there's a willingness to put it into a ledger sheet and a business model and say this is how it's going to turn out, and I worry about that because, again, as I said, of all those stresses of military life, consistency on certain things is absolutely critical for those families, and I would come back to that on the employment piece, and maybe I'm not sure if this is the right group to talk to you on this. It's the MWR funds and all that. This piece gets left out of that too. And as a senior enlisted soldier, how critical that is on where that's going to have to be made up somewhere. And I'm really not interested in watching our soldiers' family do bake sales to fund, ski rentals or whatever it might be. So I do think, and I ask my colleagues to take that into consideration, maybe asking the industry folks who a little bit better about that. With those BCG recommendations, how does it affect your business model? I mean, what would can you summarize? I mean, what's going to change if top line things it'll change?
Oh, obviously, the first thing that I mentioned earlier, and Mr. Gordy did as well, is the level of industry support. Around $500 million industry puts in annually to offset the cost of operations. A lot of it has a historical perspective from the standpoint of vendor stocking, but a lot of it is, the difference in this model is all promotional dollars go to the shelf. There aren't any fees skimmed off that are in the retail environment, slotting fees and other pools that money go into. So a manufacturer has a certainty when they put a promotion together, that price goes into the shelf. It's the ultimate supply-demand economy. They're going head-to-head with their other brand name counterparts with competition on the shelf, and the patron decides what items stay and what items go. When you start changing the model onto the private sector side, there's manipulation in what's on the shelf. The private label items are price positioned and promoted by a retailer because it's a house brand. And it's artificial patron preference because they position them next to the brand name, whether they have any sale or not, because that's what they want to sell, because that's where they make
Don't you think it's interesting? The first thing you come to, and it's very obvious in this industry, these are the things you hit on directly as the major influence, and yet that industry wasn't consulted as part of the discussion. Doesn't that seem like a glaring hole? I know you mentioned it, but I'm fascinated because I kind of anticipated this was going to be your answer. The biggest thing that's going to change, that part wasn't taken in.
Yes, sir.
All right, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. I want to address my first question to Ms. Huck and Ms. Goldberg to further delve into the impact on military families. So I represent Fort Drum, where the military resale benefit is such an important fabric of the military community. You, Ms. Goldberg, talked about very articulately that the goal should not be maximizing revenue. The benefit are the savings for our military families. What are the secondary and tertiary effects that weren't included in the BCG report or weren't included in the panel today of the impact of this proposed reorganization?
Thank you for your question. We talked about it a little bit in our statement for the record, along with my testimony. The interlocking mechanism of the commissary and the exchange is a very fine-tuned, harmonic relationship. The commissary brings foot traffic to the exchange. The exchange is another gathering place for people that operates on with a profit margin that provides dividends to morale, welfare, and recreation activities on the installation. And those could fund a variety of programs, and it's really critical to providing extra support and quality of life programs to military families. When you start to take that apart and they lose faith in the commissary benefit, they might not go to the exchange. That reduces the dividends, that reduces the programs. All of a sudden, military families may feel that though there really aren't support programs for them anymore, or that those programs are not important or valued by the Department of Defense or their community. And that really is a morale, it's detrimental to morale and readiness, and that is not a place I think that we want to go.
Ms. Huck?
I would add that the system is very interdependent in the sense that the large commissaries with a lot of volume help support economies of scale that support commissaries overseas and in remote locations here in the United States. And so our concern is that any change to the system that makes families less likely to use the commissaries in these locations, such as here in the National Capital Region, will lead to less revenue available to support those commissaries in locations where families not only rely on the savings, but rely on the physical aspect of the store on the installation. There are many locations, even here in the United States, and certainly overseas, where families have few shopping options and certainly few affordable shopping options. And so we are very concerned about how any change to the commissary system will affect those families who are in locations where the physical presence of the store is critical to their well-being.
Thank you. I also wanted to just note that I think one of the most significant statements that has been made from the panel is what Ms. Goldberg said, that these savings account for a 2% to a 9% pay raise for our military families. That is significant in these challenging economic times. I want to turn to Mr. Gordy and Mr. Nixon. BCG, obviously one of their proposals was a private label, and Ms. Huck pointed out the fact that DECA does not have the experience, the expertise, let alone the logistics capabilities. Can you elaborate on that and the challenges that would provide and the logistical issues that we would have to overcome to make that transition?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, just to kind of set the playing field, DECA did not introduce private label, not because it didn't want to. Prior to last year's change in the law, there was a brand name exception to the Competition and Contracting Act. And so if you bought brand name products directly from a manufacturer, you didn't have to compete each order. But it developed into developed into the signature of the commissary system was brand name, and those brand names were found everywhere in the world that you went. Private label is a company developed and supported brand, and we talked about they don't have the expertise to develop their own private label. DECA's not big enough to develop a private label. They just it wouldn't be cost effective. They wouldn't be able to manage the quality, so they will buy someone else's private label and put it in the store. But as a house brand, then they must price it. They must promote it, they must position it, and it's artificial positioning. It doesn't, when the day it's put in the store, it doesn't have customer preference. They're going to give it artificial customer preference because they want to sell it, because they're making money on it. And that's what primarily what private label does in the private sector. So yes, you can get from here to there. It's eyes wide open. Make sure we understand what's going on when we move into this environment, and what actually is taking place is they're putting a brand in with artificial preference to mark it up to make money.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my fourth or fifth hearing or briefing or roundtable on this issue, in addition to the excellent briefing and background work that my staff has done, and I feel like I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of an issue that's far more complex than it appeared at the outset. And for example, Ms. Goldberg, I've really been looking at the numbers and those things that we could measure, but you brought up a really important point. There's a social dynamic to this. There's a quality of life aspect that is perhaps immeasurable. You talked about military families having a secure, consistent place where they can meet and be with each other and share something that's unique to service, and I think that's important and something that needs to factor into our decisions and calculations. But I'd like, with the 4 minutes that remain, for each of you to take a minute. I'm probably never going to achieve the depth that you have on this subject. Mr. Gordy, you mentioned that as we move forward, we should look at this as a game of inches. Mr. Nixon, you talked about ensuring that we measure this appropriately as we pilot things. Ms. Huck, you talked about apples to oranges. Could you just take a minute and tell me and the committee what we should be measuring going forward? What are the key measures or metrics, understanding we won't get all the quality of life aspects, that will tell us whether the changes that are coming forward are working or not? And Mr. Gordy, looks like you're ready. We'll start with you.
Sure. You know, what's really interesting about this is why we're here is because it's all been driven by the budget. And so much of what is in DECA's budget are things that DECA will never be able to make more efficient, because it's money that they give to other programs within the Department of Defense, such as on-base support, which they can't control how efficient those things are or whether or not those costs get reduced. I think if we're going to change the model from what we have today, from having national name brand products at cost plus 6%, 1% for spoilage, 5% for surcharge. If we're going to abandon that model to move to a more complex model, we need to make sure that we've covered every area and understand every potential cost and every potential risk that might be faced as we move forward. Not say that these things shouldn't be tested, but they should be tested in small bits, and making sure that if these things start to fail, that we pull back. So that would be my...
Let me ask Mr. Nixon, is the Walmart golden rule of don't aggravate the customer seems to be very important. Would that be the primary metric, customer satisfaction in the commissaries?
Absolutely. One of the benchmarks I said was customer confidence, and clearly customer confidence is very high in the system right now because it's predictable. Everyone knows it's goods at cost. Everyone knows what the surcharge goes for. When you start tweaking that, and people no longer know exactly what's going where, what's been marked up, and why are these products, these new products, and they don't have demonstrated customer preference, why are they showing up? You start changing customer confidence. You start changing the predictability of the system, and I think that's the benchmark of the system right now. It's predictability, and the fact that its savings are audited. The patron satisfaction is done independently, and it's a valued store, and it's viewed as their store. And we have to keep that in mind. This is that the Defense Commissary Agency is managing their store.
And for Ms. Huck and Ms. Goldberg, I have about a minute left. Does customer satisfaction get to some of the issues you raised, Ms. Goldberg, that might reflect military families' understanding of the value of those commissaries, if we're measuring that? And Ms. Huck, if there's time remaining, what are the apples-to-apples comparisons we want to look at?
I don't know that I would rate savings quality or customer satisfaction against each other. I think they're all equally critical, and they play an important role, and this committee really hit the nail on the head in setting those as benchmarks for measuring how this benefit is treated going forward, knowing that a decrease in any single one of those areas could really start dissecting the entire system and making it fall apart.
I would add that we are very focused on transparency when it comes to making any changes to the commissary system. Right now, as Mr. Gordy and Mr. Nixon have pointed out, the system as it's structured is very clear. Families understand essentially how items are priced. Any changes to that are not clear to families, I think, is going to really inspire a lack of confidence in the system and the quality in a store that right now they rely upon. So we're asking for transparency in any changes that DoD makes moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. You've all very ably represented your members, and I was struck by one thing that each of you said, Mr. Nixon, that we need to avoid this trap that the beatings will continue until morale improves. Mr. Gordy, that we should avoid aggravating our customers. Ms. Goldberg, that this is the single highest valued benefit that members identify. And Ms. Huck, that those overseas at the pleasure of their government should not foot the bill. And I think for me, those are all pretty important measures of how we should approach this. I would associate myself with some of Mr. Waltz's comments, not the F-35 comment, but grocery shopping should not become stressful when we've got a lot of other issues that our military families have to deal with. And there are three, before I pose a question, there are three things I think we should remember. One, we've had these 4 or 5 hearings now, and we are talking about how many hundredths of 1% of the military budget we can save. And I think we have to keep that perspective. We are talking about a lot of dollars, but relatively a very, very small percentage of our defense budget. And two, that the benefit to our service members goes beyond just the commissary benefit. Ms. Goldberg, you've mentioned, and I got your quotes backwards, actually, but you recognize that as I said it. But there's other benefits that come from this commissary benefit than just financial. And there are other benefits to the U.S. economy. It benefits our service members. It also benefits U.S. suppliers. It benefits the U.S. economy. And any changes have downstream effects. And thirdly, we are about to consider meaningful changes to the health care system of our service members. And there's a compounding effect, I think, when we do too many things at one time. And so I think we need to be very cautious. And that leads me to this question I would ask each of you. What improvements would you advocate to the system, the commissary system, that would not hurt morale, that would not cause aggravation, that would not be seen as a decline in benefits, and that wouldn't ruin the downstream benefits that you've described? In other words, what changes do you see that cause no harm to this system?
Yes, sir. That's an excellent question, and I would say that I think because many of the things that are in the back office environment fall into the too hard to do box initially, they focused on the front end of something that's a little easier to do, and so I think that's where the focus is. I think there are so many things that can be done on the back end. You know, these are all business environments that order computers, supplies, store supplies, consulting contracts, a major systems award. These are all business systems that manage inventory and throughput and front-end systems. I would probably look at, short of making DECA a non-appropriated fund activity, is there an opportunity to loosen some of the procurement regulations on them to let them operate a little more in the quasi-government environment, to participate with the other business operations? And
I'm going to stop you there. I get the point, and it's a good one. Mr. Gordy?
I would just have to echo what he was saying, Mr. Nixon was saying. Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at the exchanges, particularly AFES just went through a restructuring. They were looking at about having a $50 million dividend. They went through restructuring. Their dividend is now back in the, or remained in the $200 million level, or close to that. So there are things that can be done in-house that have no impact. It's just about running it more efficiently.
Okay, Ms. Huck, we've got just about 45 seconds more.
I would answer what we would ask you not to do, which is make changes that affect the shopping experience for the military family and the service members who shop there. There are certainly efficiencies that can occur at the above the store level that might make the system run more efficiently, and we would certainly be open to that. But anything that affects the shopping experience of the military family or service member, we think the quality of the shopping experience itself and the access in terms of operating hours is an important part of the benefit.
And Ms. Goldberg?
I concur with the previous statements that the changes that should be relatively invisible to the patron unless they're improvements.
All right, thank you all. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I have somewhat of a different view. First of all, let me just say thank you all for supporting our military families. I have 21 years combined military service, active duty enlisted United States Army, infantry officer, United States Marine Corps, 5 overseas deployments. I support these reforms. And I think that they are not going to compromise the benefit for our families. I think that, but they are threatening for the people that run the system. And I understand that, and change is always difficult. And so, if you, in your opposition, I really strongly suggest and would love to hear more about your ideas to make this system more efficient. We've got to challenge government everywhere. We've got to challenge government to be more, to be able to deliver services more efficiently. And no area of government ought to be immune from that. And so that's my concern, and I challenge you all to do that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. You know, I understand that there certainly is the monetary savings is critically important. And I think the points that have been brought up about making sure we have the correct market basket and the correct analysis is critically important. As you mentioned, Ms. Goldberg, you know, DECA talks about a 30% savings. The BCG group with their modified basket had it somewhere around 20% or a little bit less. Needless to say, there is a break point at which the savings, if there's not enough savings, people are going to walk. So for the sake of argument, let's say we want to maintain, we set a benchmark that the market basket savings has to be 30%. If variable pricing allows that 30% savings to be maintained over what's available outside the gate, whether you're shopping in a high-priced area or a lower-priced area in the economy, as long as the service member and their family is getting that 30% savings over what's available outside the gate, what would be the downside to the pilot program of trying variable pricing? Ms. Goldberg?
I would defer to the business mechanics of that to the colleagues at the other end of the table. But as long as the savings is maintained and when the customer walks in the door, they receive that same consistent benefit, whether that commissary is in a remote location or overseas or in a high-density area, I don't see a downside as long as we can maintain that savings and not have the fallout of lost employees and other issues that could affect other military members.
Ms. Huck?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that Brooke actually made the point in her statement earlier that she had the confidence when she moved here to a high-cost area that the cost of her groceries would be the same here as it was when she lived in Florida. And that is our concern when we talk about variable pricing and setting the savings level based on what is available outside the gate versus a national standard. You run the risk that families in high-cost areas are actually going to ultimately be paying more because the 30% of the cost in the D.C. area is a different value than 30% when you're talking about a lower-cost area. So part of, I think, what makes the commissary so appealing right now to families is that reassurance that wherever they go, the prices are going to be consistent, and we would be concerned about anything that might potentially take that assurance away from families.
And so I would ask, is that a reasonable expectation that if you're living in San Francisco, you're going to pay the same amount for a grocery that you might be purchasing if you live in Tupelo, Mississippi? I mean, just for the sake, you know, again, the idea is that the level of savings should be based upon maintaining the foot traffic in the commissary, which means there has to be a savings over what that person would spend if they go outside the gate.
Our concern would be that the pay, housing allowance out of the equation, your pay is the same whether you're in Tupelo, Mississippi, or in San Diego. And so we don't want to see families who are in high-cost areas put at a disadvantage.
Okay. Mr. Gordy?
Mr. Chairman, the way I, look at the price rationalization is again, you're going to have winners and losers. And in the areas where there's going to be the losers, people that, for instance, here in Northern Virginia area, people in the San Diego area, people in Pearl Harbor, they're going to see the cost of the products go up. Now, most of us have a grocery budget, right? If the prices go up in the commissary, it doesn't mean our budget goes up. It means we still spend the same amount of money on groceries, whether, if something is 5% higher or whether it's 5% lower. That budget is the budget. For the families in these higher cost areas, they're going to end up buying less. And that's part of the challenge. In these areas where BCG said even a 5% price increase will result in a 26% reduction in traffic. So we have to measure, if we're going to increase the price 1%, 2%, 3%, what's going to be the adverse impact? And then when they also talk about rationalizing prices across categories. Now, I will tell you, I came and dropped my testimony off on Monday. I was on my way home. I said, oh, I'm near Fort Myer. Let me pop into the commissary, called my wife, what do we need? She said, stock up on meat. And they're talking about raising prices on meat. My wife knows. My wife, if it wasn't a good deal on meat, she wouldn't tell me to stop at the commissary and do that. But that's what a lot of military families do. They stock up at the commissary. And if the prices go up in these high-cost areas, and it doesn't make sense to drive, for me, it's 27 miles to the nearest commissary from my house. And my wife and I, every month, every 2 months, we go to a commissary, and we stock up. We bought a freezer for the purpose. If the prices go up, it doesn't make it worth the trip anymore. And so that's the challenge that many military families are going to have to, that's the question that they're going to have to ask themselves. Is it now worth the trip?
My time's expired. Ms. Davis, any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I know that the votes have started. The one thing I would just want to add to this discussion, I think, and I was telling that, actually, I think San Diego is cheaper than here, at least when I go to the grocery store, but fresh fruits and vegetables. I mean, that's what we really want our families to access and to use farm products from local areas. And I know when you're overseas, certainly, I guess in Japan, I don't know that I had a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, but I'm just trying to make sure that we throw that into the discussion and that we ask some appropriate questions about that too, so that our families really know that that's important. And it may be that I don't know that there would be anything different around there. It's not a labeling issue. It's not something where, families have said that's something that we're willing to consider. Again, given the right kind of studies that are done to look at that issue. But I certainly want to be sure that we don't eliminate all the issues around fresh fruits and vegetables and the farm-to-table issues that are very important throughout the country and certainly very important to our military families. Thank you.
Well, since they've called votes, I want to thank our panel for taking the time to be here with us this morning and for your excellent testimony. Please, stay in touch with the members of the subcommittee as we move forward. I want to assure everyone that our goal is to find efficiencies, create a benefit that is sustainable and valued by our service members, and we are all awaiting the GAO report and DOD's recommendations, and I'm sure there'll be another hearing once those come out. So again, thank you all very much. This meeting is adjourned.